In Gaza, where every life is shaped by occupation, resistance, and survival, one name recently resurfaced, not as a hero, but as a symbol of betrayal. The death of Yasser Abu Shabab, confirmed both by his own popular forces and Israeli media, became the closing chapter of a man Palestinians described as a collaborator, a man who attempted to present himself, with Israeli backing, as an alternative to Palestinian resistance, but instead of becoming a leader, he became a cautionary tale, a man used by Israel, rejected by Palestinians, and ultimately abandoned by all. Upon his death, the whole of Gaza celebrated. Israel was a bit bothered, but not at his loss, but at the loss of their spy. So who was this man upon whose death none is feeling sad about? Who is this person whose death is considered a day of relief and happiness for Gazans, even though he was a Gazan himself? Let's learn about this controversial person today in this video. Yasser Abu Shabab, in his early 30s, came from the Tarabin Bedouin tribe in southern Gaza. For most of his life, nobody in Gaza knew him. He was neither politically active nor a prominent figure in the resistance. In fact, he was imprisoned for drug-related crimes by Gaza authorities for years, a criminal record that already tainted his reputation. During the early chaos of the Gaza war, he escaped from prison, and that escape became the first step toward his new identity. Soon after escaping, Abu Shabab appeared as the head of a new, heavily armed group. Originally called the Anti-Terror Service, it was later rebranded as the Popular Forces. By mid-2024, this group had grown to nearly 100 fighters, operating largely in Israel-controlled zones inside Gaza. But the group's identity was confusing. To Israel, they were a useful local militia. To Palestinians, they were seen as criminals, and to themselves, they claimed to be a nationalist force fighting Hamas. In reality, they functioned somewhere between a proxy militia and a street gang, armed, funded, and protected by Israel, yet desperately trying to appear independent to save their reputation. Abu Shabab's attempt to brand himself as a new Palestinian force failed immediately. Why? Because Palestinians knew everything about whom he was working for. He knew that instead of helping the Gazans, he was actually a traitor to Gazans and a spy for Israel. He was a tool for Israeli intelligence operations. His own tribe, the Tarabin, issued a statement after his death saying, "His death marks the end of a dark chapter that does not represent the history of our tribe." That alone shows how deeply he was rejected by his own people. Despite Abu Shabab claiming independence, Israeli leadership openly exposed the truth. In June, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu admitted that Israel was using armed clans inside Gaza to fight Hamas, a direct reference to Abu Shabab's group. This was not a new strategy. Israel has historically tried to create local proxy forces, like the South Lebanon Army decades earlier, but just like before, these attempts eventually collapse because locals never support collaborators. Abu Shabab's militia was no different. They didn't have any legitimacy or real influence on the ground. Israel used him to gather intelligence, help IDF movements, and maintain limited control in certain neighborhoods. And what did he get in return? Weapons, money, and temporary protection until he became expendable. Even after the Gaza war, when Abu Shabab reportedly tried to enter Israel, Israel denied him entry. To them, he was never a partner, only a tool. It's astonishing that Abu Shabab placed so much trust and hope in Israel. Why was he unable to realize that Israel was merely using him as a tool, ready to discard him once he was no longer of any assistance? How could he fail to grasp that Israel does not consider Gazans as their allies? Reports say Abu Shabab died from wounds sustained during violent clashes connected to a hostage dispute. The details remain blurry, but one thing is clear: his last days were spent under pressure, desperation, and growing isolation. Even Israel seemed unable or unwilling to save him. As soon as the news of his death broke, scenes emerged from Gaza that spoke louder than any statement. Sweets were handed out, and people celebrated in the streets. Families who suffered from his malicious presence rejoiced. Why such a celebration? Because to Palestinians, Abu Shabab was a man who betrayed his own people during their darkest hour. And what about Israel? Well, Israel never cared about him either. They only cared about the information he delivered. His death was a blow to Israel, not out of sadness, but because their insider source, their informant, their local asset, was now gone. In the end, Yasser Abu Shabab died the way collaborators often do, untrusted by Israelis, hated by Palestinians, rejected by his tribe, useful only as long as he served the occupier, and discarded when he became irrelevant. He chose a path that brought him neither safety nor honor. His life became a real-time example of what happens when someone trades the suffering of their people for personal gain, money, weapons, and false promises of power. The story of Yasser Abu Shabab is not the story of a leader. It is the story of a man who tried to reinvent himself through Israel's support, only to be abandoned by Israel and despised by Palestinians. A tragic reminder that no power built on betrayal ever survives.